All right, welcome everybody. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together. So this is what we're working on today, this cute little parakeet. So this is the third in our series of three pet portraits. So this is all aligning with our pet portrait competition, the Best in Show competition with Artists Network. I have a link to that in the top of the chat there if you want to check that out. So if you have any interest in sharing your work, if you work in drawing, painting, watercolor, oil paints, pastel, whatever, we take it all. But we have a competition built around pets. And so again, this is the third in the series. We've done a cat, we've done a dog, and now we've got this bird. This is a lot of fun. So we're going to walk through it today. The whole objective for the show, if you're new, is that we meet each week. We set up a subject. We have a subject defined that is intended to grow our skills in a particular way. We take a day out of our lives to just kind of focus on drawing, practice, share ideas, challenge ourselves, and really kind of contemplate ways that we can improve, not only as drawers, but also an artist in any media. So that's what this is all about. If you have any questions, comments, observations, that's what the chat is for. So I'll be monitoring that throughout the event. If you have any questions in particular, if you type them in all caps, that really helps me to see it. It may look like you're yelling, but that's okay. You kind of are, because I want to make sure that you get heard and you get your observations and questions addressed. So this is a very welcoming and kind community, so I am happy to have you join us, and I am so happy to have all the familiar names out there. Some of you have been with this show for a very long time, and I love meeting with you all every Wednesday. So thank you. If you are new, or even if you're returning, I'd love to hear where you're viewing from, so shout that out and tell us a bit about yourself, what kind of work you're into, where you maybe want to go as an artist. What's your relationship with drawing? Are you new? Have you been doing this for a while? Are you trying something new? Are you stuck? Are you really thriving? We want to hear it. That's what the show is all about. So, okay. Hello, everybody. People from all over the country, all over the world. We have, so that image that's right below me here on the screen is of the parakeet. Check that out. That's in the description below the video, so you can open that up and you can be drawing along with. Or if you just want to sit back, kind of soak it all in, and then draw later, that's what many of you do as well. It's all good. I'll be working in charcoal today. Now, I did this preparatory drawing in charcoal on the rag paper that I've been using for quite a while. I love rag papers. We've been working a lot with Legion papers, but I was really excited today because I got from Jerry's, they sent out a large pack of this. This is the Soho Urban Artist Sketch Gray. Now, it's a lighter weight paper, but I really enjoy working with it, and I decided to pivot at the last minute to work on this tone paper. So we'll be building up charcoal and then in the darks, charcoal, as well as the highlights there. So we're going to be starting from this tone gray. That's what I'll be working with. But like I said, this was created a little bit differently on the white paper. If you're working with graphite, pastels, it's all good here. A lot of the things that we'll be covering will be kind of useful in any media. That's my hope. And if you are working in a different media and you have some questions on how to translate what I'm doing, throw that out to me, to the community. That's, again, why we're all here, so we can share those ideas. All right. So, okay. But this Soho Urban Artist Sketch Gray, I'll bring that up again. This is a production sample. It's not quite ready to release to the community. They make this in a smaller kind of handheld kind of travel sketchbook. But they started making them in these larger packs, and they asked if I would try it out, and I said yes. I will try it out, and I like it. So that's what I'll be working with today. The other materials I'll be working with, I'm just checking the chat real quickly. That's what when I'm looking over here. That's what I'm looking at, is the chat. I am in the process of acquiring more charcoal because I have a whole bunch of these short stubs of charcoal pencils. But this is a variety of hard and soft. So some of the Faber-Castell, some of the General's pencils. I have a white charcoal as well. I have ready some of these Soho, the Urban Artist sketch squares. So this is the white. It makes a really nice, vibrant white. So I'll be bringing that in if I need that as well. Ooh, I forgot my vine charcoal, which is right here. Got to have a stick of vine charcoal to lay out the composition. Then my erasers, my Kneaded eraser, which I found I had lost last week, but now I have found it, and I am happy about that. And I have a my trusty old Derwent retractable eraser that I have cut down to this chisel tip that gives me nice sharp edges and points for some precision. And then this is a Derwent Slim eraser. It's the same material, but it's just a little bit bigger. So I have that out in case I need it. I like to be prepared. I may not use all of these things. And I have my paper towel also to help kind of wipe things down. So that's what I'm working with. If you are working in a different media, let us know what you're working with. I see, oh, Barbie still in Inktober, so working in pens. That is a very brave medium, and I hope to try some more out. I think I've only done one episode of the show when working with pen, and it was a lot of fun, but I'm excited to try out a few different other options as well and kind of experiment. So that's kind of moving forward. I'm hoping to kind of experiment with new media. I found that I've kind of gotten into a rut with charcoal, so I may be sticking with it for a couple of weeks, but that's always on the radar, is to see how I can shake things up. All right. Let's get to it. James, welcome from London. Amateur watercolor painter. So hopefully this helps as well. One of the things that I do want to try out, you can see that heron that's right behind me. That's a water-soluble graphite that I believe Derwent makes, and that was a lot of fun. And so I'm kind of working through some ideas for some future shows with that. So that might overlap drawing and watercolor a little bit. So hello from Israel. We got Wisconsin, Canada, Washington, everybody from all over. Let's get to it. So much of the drawing process for me is about just getting my head right. That's essentially why I draw. I do it because it brings a level of clarity to my mind that I need. So it just kind of brings my mind, my body together. And so this initial stage is my gesture simply reacting to the form. And it has as much to do with the bird itself as it does with simply the need, again, to kind of start moving the body, start connecting that, to bring my brain down a little bit. I'm a little amped up today. I just had a big cup of coffee, so I'm a little wired. And so I'm trying to acknowledge that and, again, just start moving to help bring myself into this moment where I'm drawing. And at this stage, it's just reacting to the form. And so if you're new, what my general approach to drawing, and this may align with some of you who are drawing along, you may have a completely different process. But again, my general approach is to align my drawing process with my thought process. So I'm discovering the form of this bird, and I'm using the drawing process to do that. And as my drawing comes together, it parallels the depth of my understanding about the subject. So at this stage, my understanding of this bird is very surface level. We can instantly look at this and say, oh, that's a parakeet. And our brain is solving a lot of problems for us. It's creating these interpretations to tell us that this is a parakeet, but I haven't spent any time really analyzing that with any depth. And so the drawing process slows everything down, and it allows me to really kind of get engaged with the form, the texture, the light, color, everything about the bird, so that it leads to a depth of understanding that I'm not going to get with that initial glance. So one of the things that we talk about in the show is that there are many ways of understanding the form. There are three primary ways. There's the optical truth, what it looks like. There's the objective truth or literal truth. There's what the object is, and then there's a symbolic truth about it. There's kind of what it means to us. So with a bird like this, there's the optical truth of what it looks like. There's the objective truth where, it's a three-dimensional form, and there's parts of this thing that we cannot see. And then there's the symbolic truth. There's those preconceived kind of notions. There's the symbol of the bird that we bring into the conversation. And the drawing process helps us to kind of contemplate all of those things. And with observational drawing, really what we're doing is we're aligning with the optical truth. We're discovering the optical truth of this bird, and if we recreate that on the page, that hopefully it's creating an equivalent experience for the viewer of looking at a real-life bird. It's triggering then in the viewer the symbolic understanding of that bird. So that's my philosophy on drawing in a nutshell, especially observational drawing. So drawing from life. And if you are so inclined as an artist to work more abstractly, non-objectively, the value in working from life is in developing hand-eye coordination, experimenting with marks, connecting, again, your mind and your body together, and understanding the abstract qualities of the things around us. So there is an abstract quality to this bird. There's a set of shapes, lines, forms, values that are just happen to be arranged in a way that triggers a sense of recognition in the mind. And so by kind of exploring the optical truth of these objects, we're also addressing a sense of abstraction. So that's my philosophy. And if anybody has any thoughts about that, that's what the chat's for. Let's hear it. This is a place for us to contemplate the nature of our connection to art making. So again, this is really just kind of reactionary. I'm moving my eyes back and forth. My eyes are in soft focus at this point, so that I'm not really observing any fine detail. Everything is just soft, blurry, and it allows me to take in the whole of the scene. As soon as I bring my eyes into sharp focus, everything else shuts away, and all I really am conscious of is what is in that center of vision, what's in sharp focus there, which generally prioritizes texture and kind of detail at the expense of value relationships, scale relationships, things like that, is actually can distort our understanding of things by bringing things into focus. Sometimes it feels like the way to draw better is to focus harder, but my experience at least has been that it has a negative effect when doing that. So focus less and take it all in is my philosophy at this stage, and then the focus comes in at the end. All right. Yeah, Leah, I hope this is a parakeet. That's what it said. This is so I have the link to the photo on Unsplash that's credited to the photographer. So check out that photographer, and it's entirely possible that I have it wrong. So could be. And then watching from your semi-truck in Harrison. That's awesome. I hope you're not driving at the moment. So hello from Spain. Oh my gosh, welcome. Oh, and thank you, Monica. Yeah, my voice is healed, so it's good to have my voice back. So let's see. This early stage 2 is, again, this is as much of a benefit for my mind as it is for the marks on the page. The marks that I'm providing here, the way I conceive of it is as though I'm kind of pouring the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle out on the table. All right, it's it. If all of these marks in my mind are fluid and flexible, I'm moving them around. As I gather information about the subject, all of those individual pieces kind of move around until the image comes together. So similar to putting together a jigsaw puzzle where maybe you're pouring out a bunch of pieces, you're looking at all of them, you're gathering information about what's on each one, moving them around until they fit together. And I think of the marks very similarly. I need information on the page to react against, and the more information that I give myself, the more the image will come together. The other thing too is if you're not as familiar with working on toned paper, I have to kind of remind myself too that I'm going to be able to go lighter in value. You know, if I take this white eraser here, it helps to create a comparison, and you can start to be more objective about the value of this page and the relationships forming on the page, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we face when drawing or painting in any visual medium is that we're constantly calibrating to the value relationships. We're not interpreting the values in isolation. There's no objective understanding of these values. It's all about how they relate to one another. And so what is going to happen as this drawing comes together, before I add the white, my brain is going to continually assign this as white. This is the lightest light, so it's going to try to make it white in my mind, right? And it's going to take the darkest dark, and it's going to try to make that black. And it's skewing my interpretation of those value relationships. So as I go darker with my marks, it's going to change how I interpret these dark areas. As I go lighter with my marks, it's going to change my relationship to the gray paper, and it's going to change the relationship all over the place. So I'm saying that as much for my own benefit as anybody else's if you're kind of new to that concept, because I have to remind myself that. I'm going to naturally fall into this habit, or this instinct to kind of recalibrate the values of these shapes that I'm applying. And as I'm starting now to kind of build up these areas, what I'm looking at are the shapes, these kind of abstract blobs of dark. And I'm trying not to think about this as, as a wing, as feathers, as a back, as a head, etc. I'm just trying to connect with the abstract qualities of these light and dark shapes. And there's, something magical that will happen at some point where all of a sudden this mess that's on the page will click in the mind as a three-dimensional object, and we'll start to see those marks differently. And so I also have to be a bit patient with these. If I have an expectation of myself to hit a certain level of refinement in these marks, I'm more likely to disappoint myself because I'm not ready for it. I don't understand the form yet. So that's going to come through the drawing process. And then at some point, we're going to start to adjust the proportions. Some of the things I'm kind of taking stock of as I move through the form is the direction of the feathers, because that's going to come in handy later on, at least to have a base understanding of how the direction of the feathers changes as it helps to kind of model the form. How is it different on various parts of the head? What happens as it falls across the breast here and then onto the wings, into the legs? Because it's that directionality that's going to really serve us when we start to get to the texture, as we really start to refine it. Using the side of my pinky as much as I can, because if I use the tips, it's a little oily and it may impact this paper. This paper, I do really enjoy it. It's not a heavily toothed paper. So when I compare it to the rag paper, it doesn't hold the charcoal quite as much. But there is a kind of a softness to it that I really enjoy, and it does accept the material in an interesting way. All right, hello, Clearwater Floor from Kuwait. Hello. And then James is asking a good question. How do I soft focus my eyes? Squinting is one way to do that. So there are three fundamental ways in which I kind of modulate the focus of my eyes. So squinting is one way to do that. That softens the focus. It limits the amount of light that enters your eyes, right? So, and that helps to prioritize value relationships. Then the next phase, which I'm at actually at this moment, is I'm just letting my eyes relax as much as possible. And it's almost like I'm focusing on a spot like right here between myself and the screen in front of me. And that the screen in front of me is what you're seeing. It's the feed that shows the overhead camera, myself, and then the bird below. I'm going to not call it a parakeet because I may have gotten that wrong. So I'm going to try to correct that. But the bird is right below me. And so by focusing either here in front of me or 5 to 10 feet beyond, that helps to put that layer out of focus. And this is something that you can do when you're working from life as well. So if you have a living object in front of you, then it can be helpful to do that. And then the third way in which I modulate my eyes is I open them wide and really let them loose. So I'm flooding my eyes. So squinting is limiting the amount of light. Opening them wide floods them, and I'm keeping things out of focus. In that, in subtle ways, changes my understanding of the color and value relationships. And so throughout the whole process, I'll be doing that, and it may look kind of weird at some point. And sometimes you kind of get in the zone, and then when you reflect on it, you're like, oh my God, I'm making the weirdest face right now. That's okay. That's just kind of what happens. But playing around with the ways in which you kind of modulate the focus, and of course the fourth one would be just bringing in sharp focus. So there you're selecting a specific area that you're targeting for your drawing and your reference, and you're bringing that into focus. But I would say 75 to 90% of the drawing is completed with my eyes totally out of focus. And that's going to be a little bit different for each of you based on your relationship with it. If you're so inclined to create drawings that have a high level of detail and refinement, then you may spend more time, focusing than I do. So I'm kind of working on this area right now because my brain is thinking about responding to that question, which is a really good question. But I just want to kind of describe why I'm working in this section. So this area here becomes a bit of an escape hatch for me when I need to just clear my head a little bit, and I can make marks in these areas that are a little less, I don't know, there's less at stake there. So squinting, and in fact, I'm closing one eye and squinting the other, so I'm letting in as little light as possible. And then as you're squinting, you may play around with that. Really observe the subject as you're moving into that squint and as you're coming back out. What stands out? What disappears? And so the key information I'm looking for when I'm squinting, when I'm bringing myself into that squint, is which edges go away, where does it fall apart? Because that's an indicator that those values are closer together than they might appear when under sharp focus. So when you're sharply focusing on something, it's going to prioritize, again, the texture and the detail, and it's going to make edges clearer than they might otherwise, right? So by squinting, it helps to provide another layer of context to that. And often what it goes to show is that the things that are clearly defined when you're in sharp focus may actually be more similar to one another in terms of their value. It gets really confusing with something like this where we have these bright greens, because that saturation of the green can sometimes be interpreted as a lighter value than it actually is. So as a color, if I were to mix this with oil paints, I would actually, it be kind of make it a little uncomfortably dark and try to boost that saturation, try to create a pure color as I can, but a little bit lower in value than it feels like. It feels like it should be light in value, and it may actually be a little dark. Okay, so just using the palm of my hand to create these broad areas. And before I go any farther, I just want to evaluate the overall kind of proportions, the placement on the page, the general axis. And what I want to do is kind of compare the height to the width. So I'm going to use some comparative measuring. I'm closing one eye, flattening my depth perception. I'm placing this directly on top, essentially, of the reference photo, aligning that with this little claw there, sliding my finger down until it aligns with the end of the tail, and that's giving me a measurement. And then if I turn it, I can compare that measurement to the distance from that claw to the top of the head. And what it tells me is that this distance here, from the tip of the claw to the tail, is a little bit greater than the height of the bird. And so I'm pretty close to that. What I need to do, and as you can tell, like the tip of the claw there and the tail are kind of largely undefined. So if I give them a little bit more kind of clarity and specificity, that can sometimes help. So there's that measurement. And then, yeah, that's going to be a little bit closer. So now I can start to place the top of the head. And then as I do that, I'm trying to be aware of this plumb line here. If I drop a line down from the left side of the head, where does it intersect that toe? And it's just offset to the right. And then if I have kind of a rough angle here, and it makes kind of like this almost a vertical slant here with the beak interrupting it. Now I have an overall angle that I can find here, a general axis that I can angle sight. And that actually feels pretty good. And then once I have that overall axis, then it's a matter of continually breaking that down. Greetings from Switzerland. Awesome. Welcome. Yeah, Sandra is like checking the angles. That's a good call. That's exactly where I'm at right now. So thank you for that. Ursula, welcome. Greetings from windy Connecticut. It's windy out here, too, in Colorado. Holy smokes. We got a storm coming. And it's wicked windy. And I think I drove through a small snow squall. It was the craziest thing this morning. And then Rat Mammy, totally get the magic of drawing. Starts as a scribble, and at some point, like magic, I've got something recognizable. Yes, I'm so glad you said that. It is like magic. It's like magic that, it's like this image just emerges is just slow. Like if I could snap my fingers and it would show up like that, we'd be like, holy smokes, it's crazy. But if you take time out of it, then out of that equation, then drawing is magic. We're making this thing up here. All right, so now I'm being a little bit more linear with this, and as Sandra was saying, starting to check the angle. So I'll use some angle sighting to do that. So, and if you're new to that process, so what that is I'm closing one eye to flatten my depth perception, using my whatever pencil. This is a charcoal stick that I've got. I'm aligning it with the angle that I'm targeting, and then I'm carrying it directly on top of the drawing. So again, in front of me, I'm seeing what you see. So I'm aligning it with the back of this middle section of the back, carrying it across, and starting to get an angle here. And then we're going to gradually break the angles apart. Bring this across. And one of the things that can be helpful at this stage, too, is as I visualize the angle here, that's the back of the head, I'm letting that run long through to whatever's happening down here. The feet are going to emerge there. So when I'm taking that angle sight, I'm making that connection across the form. And that becomes really valuable in terms of holding everything together. So if I start to think about this angle in isolation, I run into a little bit of trouble because I can be off by a small amount, and I may not notice it. But if I'm off by a small amount, so say I have a slight angle here, as I carry that path through the drawing, it could create a distinct misalignment with something down in here. So by thinking across the subject like that, it actually helps you to arrive at a more specific angle for some of these shorter sections that you're observing. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to do that with this side here, the breast there. And start with the big angles first. And I like to establish long, straight angles here. And then once we have a sense of confidence that the overall form is generally correct, we can kind of subdivide that and focus really on more of the nuanced elements within that stretch, if that makes sense. And again, if none of this makes sense, or if you have a totally different approach, that's what this show is about, is to share these ideas. And so please feel free to shout out with any observations or questions, alternate approaches. That's what makes drawing so awesome, is that, it's ultimately what this drawing is a record of the decisions I've made throughout the entire process. And what makes your drawing different from mine is that we make slightly different decisions. In addition to the fact that we just have a different body language that's being demonstrated on the page. So I love the idea of kind of embracing that as individual artists. We kind of sharing how the decisions you make are going to be different from mine, and that's how we learn from one another. So as I'm going through and I'm starting to indicate things like the foot, I'm doing a quick check-in. Where am I relative to the rest of the form? Not only this section here, if this represents the tip of this kind of light foot, I can draw a plumb line. I can visualize what that path would look like. Where is it below the top of the head? Where is it relative to the eye? Where is that eye relative to this foot? We're kind of triangulating, moving across the form and creating notes that help to kind of narrow the playing field, is the way I think about it. We're starting with larger divisions on the page. We're gradually getting more and more refined. Still using the vine charcoal because I think it's accepting on the page really well, but I'll be bringing in the compressed charcoal in a little bit. So I don't know if that's coming through, but like as I'm moving across, I see a little bit of the wing here coming across. I'm seeing a little notch in the wing here, placing a note, moving up, checking it against the neck, checking it against the top of the wing, and then we can come back down to the wing down here, do a quick check-in, do a quick angle sight as I'm making these notes, comparing it to other forms on the bird. So, and again, these may be different decisions that you're making. Just trying to articulate what I'm thinking about. So much of the drawing process for me is about attention, and that's been something that's been on my mind a lot, is how to pay attention better. And so and it can be helpful for yourself if you have a partner that you're drawing with. Speak out loud about the decisions you're making. It can help to clarify it for yourself, because a lot of times this is what I did for many, many years, is I would just react. It was an instinct, an impulse that I happened to do a little bit more accurately, than other people. I could sit and draw, and my drawings would be a little bit more accurate than somebody else's, right? But I did that without really understanding why or how. And the more I contemplate really what it is that I'm deciding in each of those moments, the more doors it opened up for me, the more kind of flexibility, the greater range in marks that I kind of open myself up to. But a lot of it comes through, and I suspect if you've landed on this show, that you have some sort of connection with that. You realize, well, this is something that I'm connecting with. There's an instinct there that may be driving this. And there can be value in kind of exploring that instinct. And if you ever feel like that exploration is inhibiting you, then stop, right? That's my recommendation. Do whatever it takes to continue to draw, right? That's why we do this show, because we want to keep that thing going for us. And if I'm throwing out an idea for a process or way to think about drawing that you find that you're resisting against because you don't think it's making you not want to draw, then definitely don't listen to me. I think gravitate towards whatever makes you want to draw. But for me, at least, really understanding, well, why did I do that, right? And why did it work, or why did it not work? Why didn't I do that? Or I'm looking at somebody else who's doing something different. I'm like, why are they doing that? Right? And you know, we try things out, we succeed, we fail, we move on, we chastise ourselves. I think I do that at least myself, and then I try to undo that. All right, but I think at this point, this is starting to come together, and we're starting to see that bird. And now, as I move into the head, what is really cool is this gentle kind of tilt that I want to capture. And what seems to be driving that is this angle here. There's a kind of a flatness to the top of the beak that has, there's a distinct angle, and then it turns down the side and it cuts underneath. And that's what's kind of creating that angle. And now you may have initiated your drawing by establishing that central axis first and then building everything around it, and that's perfectly fine. I find that for me, I like to have some shape defined first, and then indicate that axis to see how they align. It does look like a pigeon at this point. Hello from Detroit, Brazil. All right. Had moments ago. I love that. Love that comment. All right. I find myself, one of the challenges that I face is that I tend to pick up an object, like, you know, pencil or brush or whatever, and then I forget to that I can change that out, right? So I kind of picked up that that charcoal, and I just kind of got into that rhythm. So I need to put that away. All right. So now I'm going to work with a greater degree of specificity here. What am I going to do? Something that seems to that I haven't really adjusted yet is this massive shape here that represents the edge of the wing, and I'm looking at this distance here compared to this. I'm looking at this dark mass relative to the neck, and I feel like it needs to come over. So if the eye kind of extends here, and I come down, drop a plumb line, yeah, this needs to come over just a little bit. And so with the, now this is like kind of a mid-weight compressed charcoal. I'm going to create a little bit more permanent mark. And now depending on the paper you're working with, if you're working with charcoal, what you might experience is that either that vine charcoal is really grabbing the paper or it's just floating away. I find that this paper does a pretty good job of actually holding that vine charcoal. And so like I'm really just using that layer of vine charcoal to make the compressed charcoal a little bit more receptive. Sometimes what can happen is if you go directly to a surface with the compressed charcoal, it can really hold onto the paper, and then it's hard to lift off or hard to smudge, and you get kind of stuck with that initial mark. That can be frustrating. And so with that layer of vine charcoal, I find that at least it helps that this now subsequent layer of compressed charcoal to float a little bit more on the surface, blend a little bit more easily, be a little less harsh. 5995 Char, I can't talk and draw at the same time. It took me a little while doing this show. The benefit, though, that I found is that it helps hold me accountable. You know, because I'll say things in my mind and say, oh, I need to work on this, and then I'll kind of contradict myself, or I'll know in my head I need to be doing something else, but I keep finding myself saying the same habit. And that could just be me, but that's where saying it out loud, again, it kind of holds myself accountable for doing the things that I know I should be doing, but I get kind of just lost in the mark making. Now I'm using the side of the pencil intentionally, because it prioritizes value and shape. I'm not worried about getting accurate values at this point. I'm just thinking about now refining some of these edges. In this case, I'm thinking about the positive and negative space here. So I'm working on that side of the head by drawing that dark shape behind it. That's behind it here. So that becomes a key element in drawing and painting, is looking at the relationship between the light and the dark shapes. Looking at the relationship between the positive and negative space. So positive space is the shape of the object that you're targeting. Negative space is the shape that's formed around that object you're targeting. So in this case, I like that contrast between dark to lighter, and then lighter to darker, darker to lighter. Right, that's what I'm kind of thinking about right now. Louise, I'm about to draw a pigeon. Awesome. Let's see. Wilma, yeah, you kind of follow along and then draw later. Perfect. So the other element, as we're talking about positive and negative space, is additive versus subtractive. So at this point, this has largely been an additive process. I'm adding material to the surface, and then eventually we'll be refining the form through a subtractive process in which I bring out the eraser. And again, I keep forgetting to mention that my eyes are still out of focus at this point. The way I kind of approach it is that I'm kind of making these quick notes and then moving on to another stage, another area. I'm trying not to get absorbed into any one area too early. I do really like the way this paper blends with the charcoal. And so if you are working with charcoal, I know that some people there's like a love-hate relationship with it for some people. I love it. Some people hate it. That's okay, however you land on it. The thing that can be really that can really influence it, though, is the paper. So finding a paper that aligns with the charcoal you're using in your process can make a big difference. So kind of moving into that subtractive process there. So lifting off some of the lights, I'm using this broad eraser specifically to prevent myself from kind of wanting to kind of address some of the details. And so I'm going to think about kind of refining some of these edges using the eraser. So again, if you're kind of new, to the series, or new to drawing in general, we talk about that a lot. Whatever material you have is an opportunity to contribute to the form, and it's really easy to think of an eraser as simply a tool to correct mistakes. But I find that rather than thinking about it that way, if I'm thinking about contributing to a form, I'm subtractively drawing. It will address the mistakes, but it will also advance the form. All right, and now this is a really challenging area. I'm going to try to smooth this out a little bit. There's this darker mark that I need to manage because it's affecting how I interpret the form. And now at this point I have to remind myself that I'm working on that gray toned paper, so I'm going to be able to lift brighter highlights. And with the beak, this is an area that I'm saying it out loud as to hold myself accountable. But when I squint and I soften my focus and I'm looking at that beak, that edge gets really soft. And I'm fighting that symbolic understanding that my brain is creating, that it knows the beak is there, and I want to clearly define it. And I feel like, beaks especially, as we practice drawing birds and stuff throughout our lives, that becomes such a key feature. And so I have an instinct right now to really define that, but optically, it's not as clear as it is in my mind. So I'll have to address that a little bit later. So I'm thinking about this structure here on the head, and I want to be careful with how I think about the contour lines, the lines that represent the three-dimensional form of the subject. And my goal here is to build the form through value relationships and shapes rather than lines. Use lines selectively. That's my goal here, but yours might be different. You may be doing more of a line drawing. Brendo say, how do I control the coal in time to accentuate the harder traces without damaging? It's a good question. Let's see. I guess in my mind right now, I'm assuming that I'm going to have to readdress every mark I make. There is an assumption that I'm making that says this is an impermanent stage, and that even though I might draw a mark here that represents the edge of the wing, I'm probably going to have to do this multiple times. So that's just where my mind is at this stage. At some point, though, I want to create a mark that is more permanent, and I think one of the advantages is, I have this pencil extender here, which allows me to, manipulate the tip, but my hand is all the way off the side of the table. I'm making marks clear across the drawing right now. And so that lifts my hand up. I can also kind of stabilize with the pinky here. Using the side of the pencil also, it discourages me from creating kind of more permanent marks until I'm ready. And I'm going to gradually bring this into form and rather than kind of finish one area and then move to the next. Actually, I'm going to use this for now, this paper towel. It's been sitting in my hand and I've been crumpling it like a stress ball rather than utilizing it as a drawing tool. Now I'm using kind of circular marks here to reduce the directionality of the marks, especially in that background. All right. And as I kind of move down here, I'm trying to be aware of both the form and the texture. So I'm starting to, again, we made that early pass in the drawing where I was, with the gesture, I was kind of focusing on the way, the changing direction of the feathers. So this has been kind of shaved down to the sharp point. So I'm just using that edge, and with these kind of short vibrations, I'm lifting off some of these light areas, changing the direction based on what I'm observing in the reference about the direction of the feathers. And there's kind of a bit of a rocking motion. So that it creates kind of a softer edge to the marks there. I'm trying to erase out that eye. Yeah, so I don't know if Brendo, if I didn't answer that fully, let me know, or if anybody else has any thoughts about that. I kind of say that because one of the issues that kind of came up for me a lot, and it comes up with other artists that I talk with, is that relationship with being precious with the work. And I think for a long time when I was drawing, I felt like all I was doing was just fighting the fear of messing up what I had just created. And it was inhibiting me from really fully engaging with the subject, right? And so at some point, I just came to accept the fact that I'm going to mess it up. And then once I own that, if I expect myself to have to redo all of these marks and it's going to mess up, then it puts me in a different headspace, and it changes my relationship to the marks that I'm making. It just helped me to kind of free up the marks a little bit more. So like I said, that's been my experience. But I know there's going to be quite a few of you that have a different strategy for managing that. Whether you draw with a white glove, an arm bar that kind of rests over the drawing. So you can take like just a thin strip of wood, raise it above the drawing, have some sort of spacer that lifts it off the drawing like an inch, and then you can rest your arm on that and you can work. You can use what's called a maul stick, which kind of generally has a soft pad on one end. You lean it on your drawing or on the surface, and it's a long bar, and you're just kind of resting it on your bar. That helps keep your hand above the drawing. But I think what I think about again is that this drawing becomes a record of its own evolution, its own development. It's recording the thoughts I have about the subject. It's recording my feelings, my emotions, everything that's happening right now is being translated in some way on the drawing. And so I want my drawing to kind of reflect the messiness of coming to an understanding about the subject. And in some ways, making a mess on the page also opens the door for innovation. So many great things have happened in art and in life when we've used things as they're not intended, right? And so that's something that also kind of come to mind. Like, what happens if I embrace the mess of it? And that may not work for you, or it may. So just kind of sculpting with the eraser a little bit. Again, and I'm kind of reminding myself again that these areas that now I'm lifting off here, that toe, that foot there seems, seems really light, but I know I can go a lot lighter. So I might have to start introducing the white charcoal pretty soon, just to provide some value, kind of context there. All right, let's see here. I'm trying to be really careful with this reflection on the ground to not outline. And the reason is that it'll ultimately lead to a more convincing reflection. If I reserve any sort of contour lines for the bird, that will help to create more focus, more separation on that area. Because what I have to remind myself when I'm working on this reflection is that I'm not drawing the foot, I'm drawing the surface on there. And so I want to make sure that I establish that ground plane. And so by really kind of paying attention to the direction of my marks and removing the outlines, if I outline the reflection of the toe, then it's an indication to the viewer, an indication to their mind that it's a separate object. And this is not. This is actually all one object on the surface plane. And it happens to have kind of the reflection baked into it that's bouncing off of it. But it's the surface that I have to kind of keep as my primary focus. This is true, I found, when working with like mountain streams and things like that, when you can see the reflection off the surface, you can see the surface of the water, and you can see through it. You've got those 3 layers of understanding. You have to kind of choose at some point which aspect you're working on. When I'm looking over here, I have a larger version of this reference image. That's what I'm looking at here. Let's see. James, where on the bird is the lightest value? It seems to me the leg on the front. Yeah, I would say like right here is probably the lightest value. And then this is a close second, like this value here on its toe, moving up to here. Although there's some lights in here that I might have to make a decision about. Just comparing those values. And then, we get some nice highlights along in here. How are we doing on time? We're about an hour in, about an hour left to go. I think we're making some good, we're setting ourselves a good pace here. So I'm going to refine the shape a little bit. I'm going to soften that edge. So at some point, I'm going to have to talk less and focus more, I think. But I'm going to do my best to try to keep the conversation going. This becomes a distinct shape here that I want to make sure I reference properly. What is that shape? I do this a lot when landscape painting. Ask myself, what is that shape I'm looking at? Because it's just this weird abstract form, and it gets confusing because we automatically know what that is. It's not like I don't know what this is, but when I start to analyze the shape, I'm like, I don't know what that is. So that's one of the cool things about art, I think, especially working observationally, is that it helps to deepen the appreciation with the things around us. Especially with portraiture, where we surround ourselves with people, and so many times we'll know somebody deeply, intimately, and then do a portrait and realize, oh my God, that's the shape, that's the color, that's the texture that we don't ever really need in our daily lives to understand things as deeply as we do when we draw them. So, again, the power of drawing. That's why I love drawing. But this whole show started as we found ourselves kind of locked indoors. I couldn't get out and paint as much as I liked to, and I realized that my drawing practice had suffered because I just I neglected it. I just let it kind of fade away. And so I thought, well, let me start drawing, set up this live stream, we can all get together, we can hold each other accountable. But the end goal there, the objective, was to kind of improve my painting ability. And when I'm out painting plein air, that I'm able to achieve greater accuracy, greater hand-eye coordination to help speed things up. And I found that it's been generally helpful. All right, I'm kind of losing focus a little bit more right now. So what am I doing? What am I doing? I feel like there's something in the posture that is off. So before I start to refine things further, it's that wing kind of getting in my way there. Let me just get rid of this. So wipe that edge out. Sorry, so just focusing a little bit more right now, so that's why I'm... the other thing that I didn't talk about, but it's really critical, I talk about it a lot in past shows, is the value of the indirect gaze, right? So if that's not something you practice daily, I would just encourage you to give it a shot, see what it helps, if it helps. And what it is intentionally kind of offsetting your focus and your attention. So when I'm looking at the reference image here, I can see my drawing right next to it. As I'm observing something in the reference photo, I'm splitting my attention and I'm also being aware of what's happening over here. Or if I'm targeting, say, this section in the reference photo, I'm looking here but thinking about this, or looking here and thinking about this. That becomes an additional element that you layer into all of those different ways of observing that help you to achieve a deeper understanding of the subject. And that's something I found myself not really doing in this drawing, and I feel like it's been throwing me off a little bit. So as I remind myself that, I just wanted to kind of put that out there for you as well. Like I said, the center of our focus will prioritize certain information, but not all the information. We become more sensitive to value relationships and color relationships when we put our awareness on what's around our center of vision, our center of focus. So so much, again, what I'm doing is splitting my attention, working in one area but thinking about another. It may be my objective to fix this, but in order to fix this, I need to work on something else over here. So yeah, those are some of the things that we think about here. And I need to give myself a little bit more information. Some of these edges get a little soft. And so it's kind of affecting my interpretation of the form. So as I'm going to go through this, I'm going to start to refine some of these forms. So you can see I'm using the side of the pencil. So rather than using a sharp point, I'm practicing using the side of the pencil, and the overall technique is to use this overhand grip, and I'm trying to be aware of kind of a horizontal and a diagonal shape with the mark. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully it became kind of visible there. I'm going to lift off some of the lights on this side, because what's happening, part of what makes this really understandable as a three-dimensional form is what's happening at the edges. If I come through right now and I draw a hard line that represents that path, that line doesn't exist in the photograph. It doesn't exist in nature. And so it has the potential to flatten everything out. And you look at great artists like Ingres or Degas, who use contour lines masterfully, then what you might see is a really delicate line there that represents and conveys that brokenness around that edge, the fact that it wraps this way, not this way, if that makes sense. There's this edge here, but there's also the quality of the form that wraps around it. And so as I become aware of this path, what I'm doing is, as I'm working up to the edge, I'm thinking about the way that form wraps up and confronts that line, not how I can draw a line this way. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I don't know. if, if I'm totally just blowing smoke right now, and you think I'm totally off base, please keep me accountable. And now this form here. What I just found that using the side of the pencil will often achieve a mark that feels more naturally formed than using kind of this tripod grip and using the tip of the pencil. So this kind of become my default. It aligns more with the way I paint too. I think about it more like a brush stroke than anything. And then as I work on these forms here, I'm also trying to be aware of the way those forms merge together. Those feathers kind of interlock, and you've got this texture. So we see this dark shape here, but that edge, at that edge, it confronts the texture, and that texture has a certain direction to it. So as I'm making these dark marks, I'm moving them in the direction that I think those feathers are falling. I don't know if that is coming across effectively, but and then what it is, this isn't perfectly flat. There's a bit of a curve to it just from the way it's been worked throughout the drawing, and I'm just almost kind of scooping it to create these fine lines, rolling it in my fingers so that I don't develop these flat spots on the core of the pencil there. So, but it allows me to kind of change the direction of my marks based on the changing directions of the feathers, that texture. And so what that does, though, is, again, it's about splitting that attention. So I'm trying to be aware of two things at one time. There's the direction of the marks, and then there's the shape I'm trying to create. And if it's a habit for you to outline the shape and then fill it in, you know, if it's working for you, great. If you feel like it's flattening things out, then my suggestion would be to reduce the reliance on that contour line, that outline of the shape. It can sometimes be kind of a safety measure to create a line and then fill it in. So I'm kind of getting into a sense of kind of refinement and detail a little bit earlier, but I also feel like it's helping me to establish the form and see the form a little bit differently. So as I'm looking at some of these dark and light patches that form the feathers on the bird, I'm again doing a quick check-in where I am relative to these other forms. And observing kind of just on an abstract way that these feathers along the breast, they're wrapping around the form. So the shapes here that are facing us directly are a little bit different than the shapes that we see as it wraps around the front of the bird and then wraps around the side. So they're more broad here. As we work up to the edge, you get those marks that just get closer and closer together. And this is where you can decide for yourself how accurate you need to be for your drawing. Because if you simply have that base understanding of the fact that the shapes change from the center of the bird to the edge, that even if it's just kind of an abstract expression of that, it will help to convey that sense of form, even if it's not directly a direct relationship to what you're seeing, if some of these marks are slightly off from one another. So that's where you as the artist are in control of what that threshold is, how accurate you need it to be, and how much can it exist as an abstract expression of that. Heather Maier saying that I kind of missed some late comments. I totally struggle with that too. I'm too concerned with the great end product, and then maybe I stress too much. I don't want to mess up or have to redo it. That I totally get. And that's changed for me over the years. And in general, like I'm doing this, in front of you all, but this is for myself, right? And once I'm done with this, I generally don't do much with the drawings. Like, this is a practice, right? And that helps me to keep the pressure off. And then my goal when I'm working on something that might go in a gallery or might be sold, or if it's a commission piece, and then that pressure comes in, I try to keep myself in the same mindset, all right? But it's tough. Like, you really start to tighten up, and then I worry that I'm losing some of the qualities of the process that I really want to maintain. All right, so just by doing that, you can see this two-tone effect where we have this dark value and then darker marks on top of that. It's creating more volume, creating a sense of that bounce light bouncing off the surface and up onto that bird. And that's really kind of essential for that volume. But yeah, what you said there, Heather, makes a lot of sense to me. It's so hard. I mean, a drawing, painting. I mean, I think what is unique about drawing is that we have such a direct connection with the materials, right? It's just like, and the way I think about it, I think I mentioned it in the show before, it's like almost like a seismographic activity. There's the photons of light that pass through our eyes, gets translated into an electrical signal that our brain interprets. That interpretation of the electrical signal is released as energy that runs down our arm into the material, onto the surface, and it's like kind of recording that whole process at once. And it can feel overwhelming sometimes. But I mean, that's what makes everybody's drawings unique, is that we have it's what's happening up here that's different, right? And we can't kind of help but translate that into the marks that we make, and it's so direct. And one of the things I love about, or when I see the drawings that I love, the ones that I react to the most are generally ones that you see the struggle in the work, right? You see the corrections, you see like the aggressive erasing on the page. I think of like artists like Frank Auerbach, or somebody who, if you've seen any Frank Auerbach drawings, he'll erase so hard that I'll have to put another sheet of paper underneath it or on top of it and then just keep going. And it's all recording that experience of the struggle of reacting, and it's like the image, the subject, and the artist kind of become one thing. And it gets really hard once the object becomes precious, right? But again, that's kind of what I respond to, and that might be different from anybody else. So, and we talk about that here in the show as well, is that to contemplate your relationship between drawing and the drawing, because they're one thing, but you're gonna weight them differently. That's your own unique connection to the art form. Is how much is it about the drawing and how much is it about drawing, the act of drawing. And I think I tend to prioritize the act over the subject, but that doesn't mean that I don't care about how the drawing turns out. So, or at least when I get lost, that becomes kind of my North Star, as it were. If I'm not happy with a painting or a drawing, one of the things I'll ask myself are, like, am I prioritizing the object over the process? And I'll typically kind of say, all right, I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to focus on the marks that I'm making, engage with the action of it, and then trust that it'll hopefully come out in the painting. But again, that's my take on it, that I know some artists align with, some do not at all. And that's okay. no matter what you decide. And that's just why I do what I do and other people do what they do. I need to pull out the blending stump here now. So I'm going to bring out the blending stump, work on this, kind of starting with the kind of the reflection there on the floor. I just want to really make sure I'm not kind of losing sight of the direction of these marks on the floor. I want to make sure that it's starting to read like a reflection there. And some of these are just going to be gestural understandings, expressions of the reflection. That was dangerous that I kind of contour lined. I kind of drew that line along the edge of the reflection of the foot, and that was purely a reaction that I caught myself. So if you're like me, I came to the glory of the blending stump much later in my life than I should have. But what really made a blending stump apparent as a valuable tool is when I switched my thinking to understanding that I can contribute to the form. It's not just about smoothing out your marks. It's about kind of commenting on the structure of whatever subject it is that I'm working on. It's a way to contribute to the form. And this is a well-used blending stump. And what I like about it is that it's a little bit more gentle, especially in some of these areas that are kind of more delicate. It allows me to play out the form before I commit with the heavier charcoal. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm doing at this point. And I can use it to help suggest some of the texture. And then this is really just kind of a tapping mark, letting it roll in my fingers as it just kind of glances across the surface. Let me see. I see some good comments here. About perception and aesthetics. How do you know what to use and what to remove between the details of the reference, in this case, the plumage of the bird? That's another good question. Let's see. I think that there are many aspects to it. While I'm thinking about that comment, I also have in the back of my mind that there's a comment here that Michelle is saying the first little triangle on the wing is a little higher. This, I think you're talking about this. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle, for that. So I'm going to be thinking about that. I'm also thinking about your comments there, your question there, Brendo. So essentially, yeah, the process that I'm going through now is allowing the entire thing to emerge, and I'm going to be selecting which areas to bring into focus and which ones not to. You can let the photo dictate that, or you can deviate from that. You can choose certain things and maybe let some other areas just fall out of focus. I think there is an element to it. And this is where I think it's a good question to throw out to the group, is how you all decide what to really emphasize, what becomes the focal point. Generally, like an eye, the face, tends to be something that we're drawn to, pun intended. That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of some of the things that I do to evaluate that. One thing you can pay attention to is, where do you go first? So in that initial reaction, where does your eye go? Typically we go to like the head. That's where a lot of information is communicated, especially in the eye. Maybe it's a value contrast. We're also naturally inclined to be pulled towards the areas of highest contrast. So maybe that's an area that you want to accentuate. sometimes things just happen in the mark making that drive that. You say, ooh, I really like that mark. I want to keep it. And it kind of conveys a lot of information, but it doesn't have much detail. Maybe you kind of let that sit. So sometimes it's an accident. So I think being open to making accidents and allowing them to happen can be a healthy practice. If you're doing kind of a piece of commercial art, if you're doing something for somebody else, then you might ask them and say, hey, what are you connecting with? Is it the colors, the form, texture? Is it the symbolic understanding? Is it the expression and gesture? What do you connect with? Some people just don't know. They're like, I don't know, I like it. And then you kind of have to do a little bit of mind reading, but yeah, that's a tricky thing, because our whole visual pathway is designed to make sense of things in a split second. So what we're doing in life is our brain is always inventing the world around us. We're hallucinating all the time. It's populating itself with what it expects to see when you open your eyes. And then our visual pathway is designed to take that optical information, convert it to electricity, and compare that hallucination with what we're actually seeing. And that is what kind of attracts us to certain things. We're like, oh, wow, I'm seeing this thing that's moving. Everything else is stationary, right? Or, it's a color, it's contrast that pulls our attention. And so there's a difference between what stands out optically and where our attention goes. And so sometimes simply kind of reflecting on the things that we're paying attention to on a subconscious level can help to drive some of those decisions. I don't know, that may not be a very concrete answer, but it's not. Yeah, that's one of those things that, again, that we as artists, so what makes us unique is that we get pulled in different directions. Would you say if a person is working toward a career in art, is it best to focus on drawing until you feel really proficient before exploring other media, or not? I do not. I think personally, think it's a good idea to have a mindset that you have to perfect drawing before moving on, because so much what you're going to learn about working other medias will affect your drawing and vice versa. All right. There's a difference also between the practice, the techniques of drawing, and the decisions we make that are drawing decisions, right? So when I think about controlling proportions, that to me is a decision that's a drawing decision. I think about edges, that's kind of a drawing decision, but I can play that out in paint and pastel or other things, right? Color in this medium is not something that I can really express, so that becomes a unique painting decision as well. And so those are, even though I'm not perhaps drawing, I'm not using charcoal on a painting, I'm still making decisions that are kind of inherent to the drawing process. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. And so I would recommend, kind of as soon as anybody can, to experiment with different media, and not without the fear of feeling like you have to have something perfected before you move on, because you never know what those things are that are going to actually lead you to that perfection of drawing in the first place. So painting, the process of that has influenced my drawing practice greatly. It's helped me think about mark making, values, composition, all of these things that might impact a drawing in a fundamentally different way. So that's my 2 cents. But again, this is where other people might have different opinions. All right, so I'm kind of getting a little distracted here with the beak. I'm feeling like I want to refine this beak This is really just throwing me off right now when I look at it. It's holding me back now from moving forward in the drawing. And it's a very challenging form for my brain to make sense of. So I'm like, what is this? So what I'm doing is pointing helps me. And I don't know why, but it's helping me kind of understand the form. And I'm trying to break it down logically. So here's where I might have to invent things that aren't in the reference photo, like this line underneath this hook. And I need to also remind myself that there's going to be some highlights in here that are throwing off the form, because I feel like there's something is off in here, but I don't know as if I can really express that until I bring out that white charcoal. So sorry, just kind of focusing right now. I have to remind myself to keep talking, so if anybody's joining right now and they're like, what's the silence happening? We're just watching this person draw silently. Nope, no, I try to talk as I go so that again, it holds me accountable, and it helps people understand a little bit about at least what's happening here, see if it improves kind of the mindset or practice of your own drawing. Okay, so this is, again, a really kind of tricky form. I'm going to pull out my kind of finer eraser. So again, I have it carved down to this chisel tip. That gives me a little bit more precision. Now, one of the things that comes to mind right now is we talked in the early stages of the drawing about making decisions that cross the form. So as I'm looking at this angle, seeing how the path might continue on to the foot to make that direct relationship and kind of hold everything together. Those decisions still are being made as in smaller areas as we start to create more refinement and detail. So as I'm looking at now just this beak, if I'm satisfied with the overall proportions of it, I can just focus on this one area now, but I'm still making decisions that cross now this form here. So there's this little like hole in the beak here that I can place, but I need to do that relative to these other forms, if that makes sense. And then I think I need to, I'm being really cautious here, because if I overdo that contour line, I run the risk of flattening it out, and I really don't want to do that, because it's in those little areas that I think it could be drawing a lot of attention, and if it feels flat, then there are these downstream consequences to those decisions that are going to be that I need to contend with. So I'm looking at this kind of unique kind of S-curve type of situation here. And I think I need to bring this in a little bit more. So now it's got that line which flattens it out, but I need to correct that and adjust it. But I think in this case, we have to make some decisions that are artistic decisions that may deviate from the photograph. So again, if I look at that line, for example, that doesn't really exist in the photo. And now the question I can ask myself, is it too strong? Can I lighten it? Will it hold up that way? And you can just kind of play things out a little bit, experiment with some of those edges. Oh, Cindy is saying you zoomed into the photo to draw the fine details like the beak. Oh, perfect. Yeah. That's one of the features that exists in some of those apps that we've looked at before, like the DaVinci Eye app, Camera Lucida, that it can be useful in some ways. So, all right, now I want to move on to this eye. My general approach to drawing the eye is to start with the outer shape. And I feel like I can make this eye a little bit larger. It's too small right now. Now this is where it can be aware of the kind of the overall form. It's kind of like this kind of pinched oval shape. But as I start to look at it a little bit more, you start to see the nuanced form. So there's the sphere here, but it's not a perfect circle. I'm going to lift off area for the highlight. This is where I'm switching to the tripod grip to give myself a little bit more control. So again, it's not a perfect circle. It's kind of, because of the angle, it's more the sphere is projecting out on that side. It flattens out a little bit under here with that lower eyelid. And then that impacts the shape of that white around it, because again, because of the sphere, it kind of tightens up right in here as it wraps around like that. And I'm intentionally just using these dots, like almost treating it like a connect the dots, and sneaking up on defining that edge. So I'm going to start with just a few little dots, see what that does, see if by stepping back it starts to make that visual connection. And if not, then I can add a few more and add a few more. If I start with a heavy line, I run the risk of it just being this hard edge that that ends up popping off of the form. It needs to hold on to the form of the bird in order to really feel natural. All right, let's see. Maria is saying, on most living creatures, I find my focus is drawn to the head and face. I tend to put more texture there. That's awesome. Oh, Mad Moments Go, I can't wait to see your green macaw. So yes, I forgot to totally mention that if you're new, though. You can share your work with us at artistnetwork.com. So there's a show page for this episode. You'll find that in the description below. There's a link. You click on that link, it'll take you to the page, and there's a whole discussion field where you can share your work. And so keep checking that out. So throughout the week, I notice people populating that with their drawings, and that's really awesome. That's like the highlight of my week, is to see the drawings that you all post. So, and then Mad Moments Go is saying yours ends up looking like the photo. Yeah, kind of too far with the detail. You know, and I guess I want to make it clear, like for me, you know, I have my own relationship with detail, and I'm gonna, stop short. I think I try to find that balance between expression and detail, and that where I find that balance is going to be different from somebody else's. So kind of again, that's the power of drawing, is that it allows us to connect with the material how we feel inclined. You know, with so many different media, like it can, there can be a delay, and it becomes asynchronous in a way. The thoughts that are happening in our brain, the things that we're processing, and our ability to express it on the surface. I find that with watercolor, for example. I haven't worked with it really enough to get to the point where I can think through the medium of watercolor. Drawing is the thing that I feel most connected to. I feel like there's less of a distance between this and this when I'm drawing. And with oil paintings, my goal is to continually shorten that gap. When I switch to acrylics, it changes that pace there. And sometimes that distance between the thought and execution can be really helpful. You know, it's important, I think, for me to shake that up and to challenge those things by trying watercolor, right? Trying colored pencil. It changes how we think, and there may be something to that. Maybe we need to slow our thoughts down, and if I need to slow my thoughts down, so I choose a medium that will force me to do it, and I set myself the expectation that it's probably not going to turn out well. That's okay. That's not my goal. So. But that's what I really enjoy about drawing, is there's such a direct connection to our expression. And so I say that with regards to detail because, if that's the way your mind is inclined, it's the way you're processing that information and the things that are important to you about the form, then that's great. But if you're all finding that it's not serving you, then then there are ways to kind of address that. So, but some days I just feel like really getting in there and drawing every little detail because that's where my mind needs to be. Some days I feel like just slinging stuff around the surface. Often is somewhere in the middle. So on that note about kind of focus, if my goal is to pull attention to the eyes, I'm going to intentionally simplify some of these forms in this lower area. So it's going to be about getting the proportions and the main shapes correct, but not getting absorbed in the details, the refinement too much. That's just talking about like paying attention. I just realized my brain just totally spaced out there. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to kind of check things out a little bit. But when I think about kind of focus and attention, nothing does it more for me than drawing. Painting often does as well, but drawing is kind of unique in that way. Okay. Oh, Heather, I'm glad that made sense. I mean, I guess that's my take on it. And part of that opinion about other media is formed, when I will get asked sometimes about, wanting to learn how to paint and whether somebody should, practice with acrylics before moving to oils. And I just, I found that for me, they're such different media. They get worked in different ways. There's a commonality between them. You use them in different ways, and they force you into a different way of working because of their drying time, their opacity, and like with acrylics, they dry down. They get a little bit darker as you work, or as they dry. And with oil paints, it just forces you to think about form and process in a different way, and one can easily inform the other. I find that for me, it's more valuable. It was more valuable to learn how to paint in oils before going to acrylics, because I could work in layers with oils. I could do alla prima. I could subtract. I could add. I could do all sorts of these different processes. So I could learn how to control the brush in different ways. Whereas with acrylics, I found it a bit more confining because of the drying time. And so then that taught me something new about working with oils, because it forced me to work more quickly and think about transparency in a new way. And so then I work with acrylics for a little while, then I move back to oils, and I worked with acrylics, and then I'll draw, then I'll bring in pastels, I'll try some watercolors, and each of those things, it encourages you to work in a different way. There's something unique about those various media that you can extract different learnings from. So. And then use that to inform the other things. So maybe I'm working with oils and I'm like, oh my God, this is a great place for me to try out something that I learned when I did that last watercolor. Or what I'll do is pastels. I'll pull out some soft pastels periodically to get me to think about color in a new way. Because with pastels, you select from the range you have in front of you, and then you might be able to blend a little bit and layer on the surface, but you really have to make a decision about the base hue when you're working with pastels. That helped me when mixing colors in oil painting. So that's just kind of an example of how I think it can be valuable to switch between media. I gotta get rid of this pencil here, move on to the softer Faber-Castell. Makes a darker mark. I think I'm ready for some of these dark marks. Kind of suggesting detail in here because there's so much to try to make sense of. So right now, again, I'm kind of going in and out of focus. In this area that is really complex, I'm prioritizing the blurred vision. I'm squinting more to try to take in the whole of it rather than each individual feather. Then I'm going to evaluate, determine what information my brain is filling, and then what needs to be more explicit in the drawing. This chair needs an oiling. It's really squeaky today. All right. I stopped trying to paint because I spent more time trying to get the right color mix than actually painting. I guess I need more color theory education. 5995 Char. That is an interesting thing. If I were to answer that, how would I answer that question? I don't know. I guess what I would put out there is that there are great painters out there that prioritized color mixing over execution. If you look at Cezanne, for example, he's one of my heroes. You know, I would read how, you know, he would mix and mix and mix and mix and mix, mix the color, kind of match it, mix and mix and mix, and then put down a brush mark, right? So there's a priority on mixing on the palette, whereas somebody like Monet would have a different association with that, maybe more that optical mixing on the canvas, right? And I would certainly, you know, when I was in art school, you know, my pace was fast, but I sacrificed a lot in that. I had to force myself to slow down on the palette because what was happening for me is that I wanted so much for those colors to be correct that it messed with my own perception of them, and I was achieving an inaccurate color because I was letting my natural bias take over. And so I had to force myself to really slow down, and it was really hard and uncomfortable because it totally misaligned with my own thinking. I'm thinking much faster than I can execute, but I needed to slow myself down so I can actually achieve the colors that I'm seeing, and I'm not distorting my perceptions of the world around me to suit the color that I had mixed inaccurately, right? And so that's my own history with it, and you know, I think if you're setting the expectation to mix colors more quickly because you feel like it's holding you back, then you follow that instinct. But if that expectation is there because you feel like it's something that should be done, that there's a value to speed, then I would just kind of put that out there to kind of question that and say there's really nothing wrong with slowing down. Some of my greatest favorite painters, if you look at somebody like Antonio Lopez Garcia, the great Spanish realist, he would spend years on a painting. Years. So, you know, that I don't have that patience. I really align more with direct alla prima painting, and I knew that in order to help me get there, I needed to slow down in order to so that I could really study color mixing. I think understanding color theory gets you there. Also, just mixing on the palette does that. The stuff that taking you a lot of time, they are learning a lot by doing that. So, but it could. I understand how frustrating it can be. I can only speak from the experience I had where I rushed it and I regretted it and I had to backtrack and essentially relearn how to put myself in the right mindset for effective color mixing. Having said that, I do have a course on artistnetwork.com on color theory, kind of that talks through the strategies that I use in kind of experimenting with colors and understanding color to help establish a healthy habit for color mixing. Because one of the things that I get into as well is I get into habits, into mixing the same color over and over and over again. And again, then it distorts my perception of the thing I'm studying, because my brain says, I want to make that color work. And when it doesn't, then what I do is I'll set it up and I'll look at it a week later and then realize that, you know, I forced it. I tried to make it work when it didn't. And I wanted to think it worked, but it doesn't. So, all right. So we have we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to start getting some of the light charcoal on there. But again, throwing that out to the group. If anybody has any thoughts, any painters out there that really focus on color mixing, any thoughts about the speed of that? All right. I just know for myself, probably the biggest hurdle I face as an artist is trusting myself. Right? I constantly second guess what I'm doing. I'm going to be second guessing a lot of the things I say here. And I, go on Instagram, and in my world, I look at a lot of artists that are amazing, and it's very natural to compare myself. So that's the biggest hurdle I have, is to trust myself and kind of embrace that I have the way of working that I do. I remember reading a quote by Alex Katz, to one degree or another, something similar. What he said, it was just like you learn how you use the paint and become the master of that, right? And so I look at his large paintings and I have no idea how technically it happened, right? Because he just uses the paint differently than I do, and then learn how to master that. And I keep thinking about that. Because so much of the way I use the paint is informed by other people. And I think that's healthy to some degree, but not at the expense of losing my own connection with the medium. All right, here we go. I'm going to bring out, all right, here's the white. Now, this Soho Urban Art Sketch Square I know is going to be brighter in value, so I'm going to set that aside right now. And I'm going to start kind of gently with this, and then we've identified, I can't remember who called that out earlier, asking identifying where the lightest lights are, because that's going to be really valuable here. And I'm going to reserve the lightest lights for there. So I'm just going to be a little bit tentative around this. I'm going to maybe start up here. And I need to kind of look up at what's on the screen, because the way the light is bouncing in the studio, it looks differently in front of me than it does up on the camera. So again, my primary focus right now as I'm laying in these highlights is the direction of the feathers more than anything. So these are just really fine lines using this overhand grip. And I'm starting in the center of the form because I want to create a sense of three-dimensionality. If I go too heavy on those edges, I run the risk of flattening it out. So I'm just going to be really sensitive up along those edges, try to catch some of that light that is just catching right along that edge. And then, with the light pressure, to some degree, it'll kind of blend. So I'm just starting lighter, and then as I feel more confident about the placement of the mark, I can make another pass with a heavier pressure. Sorry, this is requiring a little bit more focus. And I think what I want to do is a little bit of clarity here. Looking at the beak, the light is strongest right in here. I think I'll pull in a little bit under here to tie those together. But is that that's too hot right there, too heavy. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this. There's a little bit of a backlight. So if I have a fine enough line, let's see, how's that read? Then it'll kind of convey that little backlight without it being too heavy, without it standing out too much. So there's a little bit of light catching on these tips of the feathers. So there's really nothing here on the page. I ended these dark marks and I'm picking up the lights here, but then we start to fill in that gap between. Gail, hello. I'm glad you're out there taking advantage of the warm day there. Good. Thank you for the comments, everybody. And then Dragonfly 15 says that you find the color wheel assists with the color mixing. Yeah, I think that's I've never. I mean, I have to some degree, but I've had a hard time working with the color wheel in the process of a painting. When I do it as exercises, then I learn, like, sometimes I'll just take some time just to mix color and not paint, you know, so that I have the intention of learning how these colors come together. And I also think it's important to change up your pigments periodically. So every year or so, I'll kind of shake up my palette and throw a new color in there just to see what it does. Recently I started working with a turquoise and using a CMYK color palette, and that was really helpful. And now I kind of alternate back and forth between using that and more of the traditional color palette, but because there are, you know, kind of multiple color wheels that you can lean on. You can use the CMYK, RGB, and the traditional, and I'll give you some information about how colors work together. Where I really struggle with and where I'm kind of working on is color harmony. So choosing colors specifically for their harmonious qualities rather than replicating what I'm seeing. So that's kind of the thing that I'm struggling now in my painting with. All right, let's see. Well, I'm saying I work mainly with watercolors. What has helped me is to make lots and lots of color charts with my pigments so that know how those colors will react with one another. Oh, that's a really good idea. I've heard that from many artists that I've worked with, and I worked with, like, Gene Haynes says the same thing. Tom Schaller really studies color pigments. Michael Reardon, when I've worked with some of those videos, you know, they all have, especially when you deal with things like opacity, granulation, things like that. All right, so I'm working down in this area. I know this area is going to need to be brighter than those. So these marks that I'm making now, I'm keeping fairly light and using it to refine the edges. And then I'm going to be bringing the brighter highlights in here. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So I really am enjoying this paper. This is that Soho Urban Sketch paper, which isn't quite available yet, but it will be hopefully soon. keep that edge broken as much as possible, or as practical. So I'm kind of moved down to this area here since I've got fine lines here, and I'm kind of losing the tip of the pencil. So by working on a broad area like this, it helps me to keep my pencil sharp. Same with this area here as I start to indicate the texture and the structure of light and the foot, kind of prioritizing the pressure at the top of the foot and letting it kind of lift to create that rounded kind of transition. And then this back part here. Now, what I'm noticing is I didn't really clean the paper here, so there's this layer of the dark charcoal that I'm kind of contending with this white, and it's kind of picking up a little bit, so I might need to clean it. But one of the advantages to the overhand grip is that it encourages the material to float on the surface, so I can kind of lay the white charcoal on top of the black. If I switch to this, it starts to push it aside, and it almost starts to mix a little bit more, I found. So if you're laying white into your drawing at this point and you're finding that it's not accepting very well, you might have to lift some of that charcoal off with the eraser and then add the white charcoal. And so most of these marks here, I'm really just dragging and lifting. Ooh. Broke the tip there. It's all right. So that's one of the advantages to working with the side of the pencil, this overhand grip, is that you kind of always have a sharp edge. I just found that when I was working in the tripod grip more, then I was always having to sharpen the pencil, and it just kept throwing me off. I couldn't really get engaged with the drawing because I just kept getting frustrated with the pencil. So switching to the overhand grip has been helpful. Of course, I'm using the tripod grip there, but all right, now I want to get a little bit of the light here, this catching on the wing. There's kind of some broader marks on the top. And you can really observe along that contour how it gets broken. It's these patches of light. I also find that using the overhand grip, I can create longer, straighter lines more easily. It's a little bit more supportive, and I can use the shoulder more than when I use the tripod grip. So I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit. I've realized I'm holding my breath. You need to breathe. First rule of drawing is make sure you breathe. So. I don't know what that is, but there is this kind of instinct sometimes to just hold my breath when I'm concentrating. Get a little bit of that light here on the foot. So one of the other things that you might be able to see that as I drag along that line, I'm picking up charcoal. If I roll my pencil as I go, it can sometimes help make that charcoal lay down a little bit more easily. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm just moving back and forth. I've got the large reference, I've got the small one, and then I've got the drawing in front of me. So just kind of checking those You know, at this point, I'm kind of keeping my eyes in focus more. And I'm trying to have an idea where I'm targeting when I go to the reference. So it's making a quick evaluation, but when I'm going to the reference, I know exactly where I need to go to get that little bit of information, drop a mark down, move to the next spot, make a mark, move to the next spot, etc. What I would find a lot when I was first starting to draw is that I would kind of study, and I'd almost try to like memorize the image, and then move my drawing and draw, and not ever looking back up at the reference. And the thing is like it's really hard to retain that information. So instead of just taking it in small chunks, right? You know, we started with a broad understanding of the form, and we're gradually becoming more and more specific. And then as I start to look at the details, then you know it's about gathering one set of details, but not overthinking about it. Just looking and say, wait, that's the shape I need. Trying to indicate that on the surface. And then move to the next one, because for me at least, the longer I look at something, the more it distorts my vision. Just like when I look in the mirror, if I stare at my nose, it'll change shape. Holy smokes, whew, I am getting tired. This is starting to require more focus. I don't know about you guys, but I used to have a lot more endurance with this stuff when I was younger. I could sit and draw for hours and hours and hours. But one of the things that I'd be kind of curious how you all feel about this, if you can connect with it. But when I would do that, when I would kind of binge essentially, and really I would spend 12 hours or more just straight working on a drawing or a painting, I would then be exhausted for the next day. And then the next day would come by and I'm like, well, gosh, I spent so much time working on that last drawing. I'm kind of exhausted. Next thing I know, 2 months has gone by and I haven't painted. I'm still riding that impression that I had kind of burned myself out on that one event. And so I had to switch my thinking about that to more about how do I create a healthy drawing habit, healthy painting habit where I'm doing it regularly. And I had to be mindful of those times where I felt like I just wanted to binge the whole thing. So, all right, I'm going to pull out the Soho sketch square, drop in a little bit kind of more intense white. And see if that helps create that structure, the brightest bright being down in here. I think I want to try this, get a little bit more intensity up here. And right in here as well. If you've never really worked with like a brick like this or a stick, it could be really helpful, I think, sometimes to, going to help you see shape and learn how to control media a bit. So as we talk about kind of experimenting and shaking things up, if you find that you're primarily working in with pencils, see what happens if you switch to like a charcoal stick or one of these kind of sketch squares. I am taking a risk with this right now, and I don't know if I like that. Just kind of blend these together, soften that transition. I don't know why I felt particularly compelled to add that there. I think I just wanted to have a little bit more contrast up in here to bring that head forward. All right. Oh, Tina's saying you do that too about holding your breath. I'm glad I'm not the only one. All right, thank you, Tina. Yes, this is, there's a question about the charcoal white. This is a General's charcoal white that I'm working with. All right, thank you, everybody. I think we're just about done. I think what I want to do now is, we talked about kind of line work and edges and using value relationships as much as we can on this one, or that was my objective at least. But now we can come back in and, because of that background, I haven't really given much information there. I think that's all right. I don't really have the time or really want to add much more. But I can come back in and be selective about where I drop a line to help clarify the form. So for example, like right in here, I think I could add a little bit more structure there. Maybe under here. So this is just with a dark, soft charcoal. And maybe under here, I think I want to kind of sharpen up that edge just to bring a little bit more focus there. So, I mean, that's one of the things to think about too, is getting back to that comment about, where do we add detail? I've been contemplating that a lot throughout the last few months about the relationship between refinement and details. And for me, it's been helpful to consider the refinement of edges as being more important than the adding of details, right? So where an edge is more refined is going to draw our attention. So right in here, by sharpening that edge, it's going to pull some attention, but I'm not really adding any details, if that makes sense. And so where here, for example, that edge is a little bit soft. Here, that edge is soft. But I can, I could come in under here, sharpen up this edge, and that's going to draw some attention as well. Again, I'm not really adding any detail. I'm not adding information. I'm just crisping it up, right? Kind of like on a, like a computer monitor, or, when you're focusing a camera. A little bit more texture in here to kind of, I want to round out a little bit more. So I kind of indicate some of the pattern of the feathers there to bring that centerpiece forward and allow this side to kind of wrap around. All right, but I think I'm gonna call it. It's been a little over 2 hours. I'm exhausted. Holy smoke. But thank you so much for joining me. I'm gonna hang out for a little bit more to see if there's any other questions that come through. If you do, shout out now. There's about a 30-second delay, so I gotta hold off from that. So while you're asking any lingering questions, just a reminder that the early bird deadline for the competitions is going to end soon. And so check out that link that I posted at the top of the chat. I pinned it there. It's also in the description below. I want to see your work, so if you want to share that, there's a link in the description below to the show page where you can see your work when you're done. So if you've worked in charcoal, awesome. If you've worked in something else, that's even cooler too. So use whatever medium you want. I just like to see your work. That's what this is all about. Next week, a landscape working on toned paper again, but the toned paper, working with atmospheric perspective, creating this kind of mountain valley scene. So I'll be posting that soon. So keep an eye out for that. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all of those things so you know when the next one is coming along. But again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I appreciate all of the positive feedback. I appreciate the comments that really helped me to improve the drawings too. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I will see you next Wednesday.